On the distant planet of Arathar, there lived a princess named Zelia. She was unlike any other princess in the galaxy. Her beauty was unmatched, her mind sharp, and her strength renowned throughout the stars. Her name was spoken in awe by many, and the rulers of distant worlds dreamed of gaining her favor. But there was one thing that no one could understand about Zelia. She was not interested in love, not for any of the male suitors who arrived, eager to prove themselves worthy of her hand. Princess Zelia was raised to rule. She had been trained in combat, leadership, and diplomacy from a young age. There was no need for a man to distract her from her duties. Many alien species, from the proud and powerful to the noble and wise, had come to court her. They had presented gifts, they had demonstrated their strength, and they had tried their best to impress her. But none had succeeded. Zelia simply wasn't interested. She had a kingdom to lead, and her people came first. The idea of a romantic partner was something foreign to her. The palace of Arathar stood tall on the highest peak of the planet's capital city, a gleaming spire that reached toward the sky. It was surrounded by beautiful gardens and vast training fields where warriors practiced daily. The planet's technology was advanced, with ships capable of traveling faster than the speed of light and weapons that could defeat entire armies in minutes. Yet, despite all the power and wealth of her world, Zelia felt a strange emptiness. Her father, King Arathar, often told her that ruling the galaxy was a lonely task, but she didn't mind. She was strong, and she could face anything. One evening, as the twin moons of Arathar bathed the palace in their silvery light, King Arathar made an announcement that would change everything. The grand banquet hall was filled with the elite of Arathar, and an air of excitement buzzed through the room. The king stood at the center of the hall, his golden robes shining as he addressed the crowd. "My people," the king called out, his voice deep and commanding. "It is time that we find a suitor for our beloved Princess Zelia. She is the jewel of Arathar, the heart of our kingdom, but she has not yet found someone worthy of her. To this end, I am opening the trials to any who wish to prove their worth. The strongest, the bravest, and the wisest will have the honor of becoming her partner." A murmur ran through the crowd. The king's words were bold and unexpected. No one had dared suggest such a thing before. Zelia, who had been standing at her father's side, remained silent, her face an unreadable mask. She had heard the rumors, the whispers from other worlds about her beauty and her strength, but she had never taken them seriously. She had never desired a suitor, and she certainly didn't need one. "The trials will begin tomorrow," the king continued. "Those who seek the hand of our princess will face challenges of strength, wisdom, and courage. Only the most worthy will have the privilege of standing by her side." The room fell silent. Zelia's gaze swept over the faces in the crowd. She could see the eager expressions of the suitors who had come from far and wide. Their eyes shone with hope, and some even wore confident smiles, certain that they would be the one to win her favor. But Zelia felt nothing. She had seen it all before. They were all the same, powerful, skilled, and eager to show off. But none of them truly impressed her. None of them had the fire or the heart she sought. The next day, the trials began. 1. By one, the suitors entered the arena. They came from different worlds, each with their own skills and abilities. There were warriors from the strong and warlike planet of Varak, diplomats from the peaceful planet of Lysara, and sages from the ancient world of Terabeth. Each suitor had a chance to prove themselves, and each one failed to leave an impression on Zelia. The first challenge was a test of strength. Each suitor had to face off in a battle against one of Arathar's finest warriors. One by one, the suitors were defeated, their strength no match for the trained soldiers of Zelia's kingdom. The warrior from Varak was the first to fall, his overconfidence turning into embarrassment as he was knocked to the ground. The crowd gasped, but Zelia did not flinch. She had seen it all before. The warriors fought with skill, but none had the heart to truly win her admiration. The second trial was a test of strategy and wit. The suitors had to solve a complex puzzle that had stumped even the brightest minds of Arathar. The puzzle was a trap, designed to test not only intelligence, but patience and foresight. One by one, the suitors tried, but none succeeded. Some became frustrated, others gave up, but none could match the cunning needed to complete the challenge. Zelia watched, her eyes cold and indifferent. None of these men had the qualities she sought. She was not impressed by brute strength or cleverness alone. She sought something deeper, something more meaningful. As the trials continued, Zelia's heart grew heavier. She had no doubt that these men were skilled and powerful in their own ways, but none of them seemed worthy of her. They fought for glory, for honor, but they did not fight for something greater. They did not fight for her. Then, at the end of the day, when all the suitors had failed, a lone figure stepped forward. He was different from the others. He did not have the imposing presence of the Varric warriors, nor the wise air of the Terabeth sages. He was a human, a man from Earth, a species that Zelia had never given much thought to. But there was something about him, something in his eyes. He did not look like a man trying to win her heart. He simply looked determined. And that, alone, was enough to make her curious. The crowd parted as Jackson Cole stepped forward. He was not like the other suitors. He was a human, a soldier from Earth, and his presence in the arena was met with a mix of surprise and confusion. Some of the onlookers chuckled under their breath, unsure of what to make of him. He wasn't tall like the Varric warriors, nor did he carry the air of wisdom like the ancient sages. He was simply a man in a simple uniform, with nothing but the determination in his eyes to speak for him. Jackson was well aware of the whispers around him. He had heard the stories of the princess and the many suitors who had failed to win her favor. He wasn't arrogant, nor did he believe he was superior to the other challengers. He simply knew he had something that none of the others had, the heart to fight for what he believed in. And that, he hoped, would be enough to stand out. Princess Zelia watched from her high throne, her cold eyes studying the newcomer. She had seen many men come and go, but none like him. There was no grand display of power or arrogance. He didn't approach the trials with confidence or bravado. He simply stepped forward, ready to do what was necessary. King Arathar, Zelia's father, raised his hand, signaling that the next trial was about to begin. The first challenge, he announced, is a test of strength. Each suitor must face a warrior of Arathar in hand-to-hand combat. The last one standing will proceed to the next challenge. Jackson didn't flinch at the announcement. He wasn't the largest or the most imposing figure in the arena, but he was fit, trained, and ready. The warrior he was to face was a towering alien from the planet Varric. His name was Garrick, a beast of a man whose reputation for strength had spread across the galaxy. Garrick's muscles rippled beneath his thick armor, and his eyes glowed with the promise of victory. As Garrick stepped into the arena, the crowd roared with excitement. They had seen his strength before, and many expected him to easily crush the human who stood before him. Jackson didn't seem intimidated, though. He adjusted his stance and focused, his eyes locked on Garrick's. The battle began with a clash of bodies. Garrick swung a powerful punch, but Jackson ducked at the last second, narrowly avoiding the blow. He quickly countered, landing a quick strike to Garrick's side, but the Varric warrior barely flinched. The crowd gasped. They had expected the human to fall in the first few seconds, but Jackson was holding his ground. Garrick charged again, this time with a series of brutal punches aimed at Jackson's chest. Jackson dodged each one, moving with agility that seemed to surprise everyone, including Garrick. The human was fast, but more importantly, he was clever. He wasn't trying to overpower Garrick. Instead, He was reading the Varric warrior's movements, waiting for an opening. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Jackson saw his chance. As Garrick lunged forward, Jackson sidestepped and grabbed the Varric warrior's arm, twisting it behind his back. With a swift motion, Jackson used Garrick's own momentum to throw him to the ground. The crowd fell silent. Garrick struggled to stand, but Jackson held him down, his body poised with precision. It wasn't through brute strength that Jackson had won, but through skill, speed, and timing. He wasn't the strongest, but he was the smartest, and that was something the other suitors had overlooked. King Arathar watched, his face unreadable. Princess Zelia, too, did not speak. She had expected nothing from the human, but now, for the first time, she found herself intrigued. "Victory to the human," the king declared, his voice booming across the arena. Jackson stood, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, but there was no sign of exhaustion in his eyes. He had proven his point, but the real challenge was still ahead. He wasn't here for fame or glory. He was here because he believed in something greater, something that the others had failed to see. As Jackson made his way out of the arena, he could feel the eyes of the crowd on him. Some were still skeptical, others impressed. But none of it mattered. He had come to Arathar for one reason, and he would see it through to the morning after Jackson's victory in the first trial. The atmosphere at the palace was different. The usual prideful confidence of the alien suitors was replaced by uncertainty. The human had proven himself in a way they hadn't expected, and now all eyes were on him. But Jackson didn't seem to notice. He was focused on what came next, the second trial. Princess Zelia sat on her throne, watching the proceedings with a detached air. The suitors had all been given their instructions for the upcoming challenge, a test of intellect and diplomacy. It was a task that required more than just strength or speed. The suitors would have to use their minds to navigate a difficult situation, a situation where quick thinking and wisdom would determine the outcome. Zelia knew this trial would weed out the weak, the arrogant, and those who only relied on their physical power. The crowd had gathered in the royal hall, where a grand table had been set up. At the center of the room sat a holographic map, showing the galaxy and several worlds in conflict. Zelia's father, King Arathar, stood beside it, his expression serious. "The challenge is simple," the king announced. "We have a conflict brewing between two neighboring planets, Gorath and Lysara. These worlds have been at odds for centuries, and the dispute has now reached a breaking point. The suitors must negotiate a peace treaty between them, using their wits and diplomacy. The one who succeeds will advance to the next trial." Jackson stepped forward, his eyes scanning the map. The planets of Gorath and Lysara were locked in an ancient feud, and it was clear that this was no simple task. The aliens who had come before him had all failed to navigate the tricky politics between these two planets. But Jackson had experience. He had faced down similar situations during his time as a soldier. He knew that diplomacy wasn't just about talking. It was about understanding both sides and finding a way to bring them together. One by one, the suitors took their turns at the table. They were greeted with a series of complex scenarios designed to test their knowledge of intergalactic politics. Some tried to use forceful threats, others tried to bribe the planets with promises of wealth and power, but none of them succeeded. Zelia watched as the others failed, and her eyes lingered on Jackson as he stepped forward. "Your challenge," King Arathar's voice echoed, "is to broker a treaty between Gorath and Lysara without the use of force or threats. You must convince their leaders to lay down their weapons and agree to peace." Jackson nodded and approached the table, focusing on the situation in front of him. The map displayed the two planets in question, with tension visibly rising between them. Gorath was a militaristic planet, ruled by a brutal warlord, while Lysara was a peaceful world known for its scholars and diplomats. Both planets had claims on a resource-rich asteroid belt, and the dispute over it had escalated into a full-scale war. Jackson began by studying the history between the two worlds, noting their past alliances, as well as the deep-rooted animosity that had developed over the centuries. He could see the patterns in the conflict, how it had started with a small disagreement, but over time, it had been twisted into something much bigger, fueled by pride, fear, and the desire for control. He knew that simply offering peace wouldn't be enough. He needed to understand both sides of the conflict before making his move. He started with Gorath. The warlord who ruled there was a powerful leader, but his people had suffered greatly from years of war. Jackson knew that power could only take him so far. He needed to find common ground, something that could bring the Gorathians to the table without losing face. Next, Jackson turned his attention to Lysara. The leaders of Lysara were more peaceful, but they were tired of the war. They had no interest in fighting, but they were proud of their culture and didn't want to appear weak. Jackson could tell they needed reassurance, something to prove that a treaty would benefit them as well, not just the Gorathians. Jackson took a deep breath and began speaking, his voice steady and calm. "I understand that this conflict has been raging for a long time," he said. "But this war isn't just about resources. It's about pride, fear, and the idea that one side must defeat the other. But what if there's another way? What if there's a way for both sides to win without fighting?" The room fell silent as Jackson continued. "Gorath, you have strength and power. You have the ability to defend your people and protect what is yours. But peace isn't a sign of weakness. Peace shows strength, the strength to build something better for your people. And Lysara, you have wisdom and knowledge. You've built a society based on learning and progress. You don't need to prove yourselves through war. You can teach the galaxy that peace is the way forward." Jackson paused, allowing the words to sink in. He could feel the weight of their gazes on him, but he didn't back down. He had to make them see that peace wasn't just possible, it was necessary for their survival. "You don't have to lose what you hold dear," Jackson said softly. "You just have to be willing to let go of the need for domination and control. We can find a solution that benefits both of you, something that protects your people and your values. A treaty isn't about surrendering, it's about moving forward." Zelia watched from her seat, her expression unreadable. She had seen many diplomats come and go, and she had heard many promises of peace. But something in Jackson's words felt different. He wasn't just speaking to win favor. He was speaking to change the way the galaxy saw conflict. For the first time, Zelia felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt before. She had always valued strength and power, but now she was beginning to understand that true strength was about more than just fighting. It was about the courage to stand up for what was right, even when it was hard. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then, one by one, the representatives from both Gorath and Lysara began to speak. They didn't agree immediately, but they listened, and that, in itself, was a victory. King Arathar looked down at Jackson with a nod of approval. Princess Zelia remained silent, her thoughts swirling. The human had done something none of the others had done. He had brought the two worlds to the table, and in that moment, she knew the trials were far from over. But she couldn't help but wonder what would come next. The final trial was nearing, and tension filled the air. Jackson Cole had done what no one had expected. He had won the strength trial, and then, against all odds, he had shown an unexpected brilliance in the diplomacy trial. With each victory, the other suitors began to lose confidence. Some quietly withdrew from the competition, certain that no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't match the human's determination and cleverness. But the last challenge would be the hardest of all, a test of loyalty and leadership. Princess Zelia watched from her throne in silence, her mind still heavy with thoughts of Jackson's words. She had always believed that leadership came from power and strength, but Jackson had shown her something else, that leadership also came from wisdom, understanding, and the courage to do what was right, no matter the cost. Today, the final trial was a test of leadership under pressure. The suitors were to lead a group of Zelia's people through a dangerous and volatile region of Arathar. This region, known as the Wildlands, was filled with wild creatures, treacherous terrain, and unpredictable weather. The suitors would have to guide their teams safely across the harsh landscape, making quick decisions and solving problems along the way. It was a test that demanded not only physical stamina, but also the ability to lead with calm and control under pressure. The crowd gathered outside the palace where the trial was to begin. The suitors stood at attention, their faces determined, but Jackson, as always, was calm. He didn't seem worried about the trial. He knew this was just another challenge. What mattered now was that he kept his focus, just as he had in the trials before. As Jackson stepped forward, Zelia could see the quiet confidence in his eyes. There was no arrogance, no boastfulness, just a steady resolve. He was ready. Zelia couldn't help but notice how different he was from the others. He wasn't the strongest or the most famous, but there was something about him that made her want to watch. King Arathar raised his hand, signaling the start of the trial. "You have 1 hour to gather your teams and prepare," he said. "After that, you will enter the Wildlands and navigate your way through the region. Your success will depend on your ability to lead and protect your team. The winner of this trial will be named the suitor worthy of Princess Zelia." The suitors quickly scrambled to organize their teams. Jackson's group was made up of experienced soldiers and scouts from Arathar. He wasn't the leader of the group by default. He had to earn their respect, just as he had earned the respect of the other suitors. "Listen up," Jackson said, his voice strong but calm. "We're not here to win a race. Our goal is to make sure everyone gets through this safely. Stay together, watch each other's backs, and don't take unnecessary risks." The team nodded, and they set off. The path through the Wildlands was rugged and dangerous. The thick forest was dark and filled with sharp rocks and vines that could trip up the unwary. A constant mist hung in the air, making it hard to see what lay ahead. As they moved deeper into the Wildlands, the ground began to tremble beneath their feet. Suddenly, a massive creature, half beast, half machine, burst from the trees. It was the size of a small building, with sharp claws and glowing eyes. The team froze in place, fear gripping their hearts. Jackson acted quickly. "Form a circle," he shouted. "Keep your weapons ready, but stay calm. No one moves until we have a plan." The creature growled, its massive claws scraping the ground. Jackson knew they couldn't fight it head-on, at least not without risking everyone's life. He glanced at his team, looking for a way to turn the situation to their advantage. His mind raced. "Move left," he commanded. "Everyone, move together. We're using the terrain." The group shifted in perfect unison, making sure the creature couldn't get a clear target on any one person. They used the nearby boulders and trees as cover, drawing the creature's attention away from the weakest members of the team. Jackson kept his focus on the creature, waiting for the perfect moment to act. When the creature lunged at one of the team members, Jackson made his move. He grabbed a long spear from one of the soldiers and hurled it with deadly precision. The spear struck the creature in the side, and it roared in pain, stumbling back into the forest. "Now move!" Jackson yelled. With the team now in motion, they quickly continued on their path. The creature was still out there, but Jackson had bought them enough time to escape. He was thinking ahead, always planning for the next step. As they moved forward, the terrain became even more treacherous. The sky darkened, and heavy rain began to fall. The group slipped and slid on the wet ground, struggling to maintain their balance. Jackson called for them to slow down, not to rush. "We can't risk anyone getting hurt," he said, his voice steady. The rain continued to pour down and the temperature dropped. The team's morale began to falter. Some of them were growing tired, their energy waning from the constant struggle to keep moving. Jackson noticed this and stopped for a moment, turning to address the team. "We can't stop now," he said, looking each of them in the eye. "We're close. We've come too far to quit. Stay with me." His words were simple, but they were enough to reignite the team's resolve. They pressed on, determined to make it through the trial. Finally, after what seemed like hours, they reached the end of the wildlands. They emerged from the mist, tired but victorious. The team had made it, and it was clear that Jackson's leadership had been the key to their success. When they returned to the palace, the crowd cheered. Jackson's team had survived, and he had led them with calm and confidence. The other suitors who had failed to lead their teams through the wildlands watched in silence. Princess Zelia was the first to stand. Her eyes were locked on Jackson, and, for the first time, she couldn't hide the respect she felt for him. He had proven that leadership wasn't just about strength or glory. It was about knowing when to act, when to be patient, and when to trust in the people around you. Zelia had always believed that power was what made someone worthy. But now, she saw something in Jackson that no one else had, something that made him worthy of her attention, and maybe even her heart. The day of the final trial arrived. This would be the last test, and it would decide who was truly worthy of Princess Zelia's heart. Jackson Cole, the human who had already surprised the galaxy with his bravery, intelligence, and leadership, now faced his greatest challenge yet, a duel against the strongest warrior in the galaxy. The duels were a tradition on Arathar, where the strongest suitors fought for the hand of the princess. Princess Zelia had seen many powerful warriors fight before, but none had ever won her heart. She had been taught that a true leader needed strength, but she was beginning to understand that there was more to a person than just power. Still, she couldn't help but wonder. Would Jackson, a human, be able to prove himself against the mighty alien warrior who stood before him? The arena was huge, surrounded by high walls, with the crowd gathered in anticipation. The air was filled with excitement, and the sound of murmuring voices echoed across the stadium. The final duel would take place in front of all the people of Arathar, and the whole galaxy would watch. The challenge was simple. Defeat the opponent in combat, and the princess's hand would be awarded to the winner. Jackson stepped into the arena, his heart racing. His earlier victories had earned him respect, but this was different. This wasn't about strategy or diplomacy. It wasn't about cleverness or leadership. This was about sheer strength and skill in combat. His opponent was the mightiest warrior on Arathar, Gorak, a huge and terrifying alien whose reputation had spread across the stars. He was known for his strength, his skill with a blade, and his unrelenting nature in battle. Gorak stood in the center of the arena, towering over Jackson. He was a massive creature, with thick green skin and muscles that bulged from his armor. His eyes glowed with a fierce intensity, and his battle axe was gripped tightly in his hands. The crowd cheered for Gorak, expecting him to easily defeat the human who stood before him. Jackson took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He wasn't the biggest or the strongest, but he had faced dangers before, and he knew how to fight. He had trained his entire life, not just in combat, but in how to read his opponents, how to use the environment to his advantage, and how to think on his feet. The sound of the gong echoed through the arena, signaling the start of the duel. The moment the bell rang, Gorak charged forward, swinging his massive axe with incredible force. Jackson barely managed to dodge the first swing, the blade missing him by inches. He could feel the power in the air as the axe cut through the space, where he had been just moments before. The ground shook with the impact. Jackson didn't have time to think. He had to move fast. He darted to the side, his feet light and quick, avoiding another devastating blow from Gorak. The giant warrior swung his axe again, but Jackson was already in motion, slipping behind a large pillar to use it for cover. He knew that he couldn't match Gorak's strength, but he could outmaneuver him. Gorak roared in frustration and swung the axe again, but this time Jackson was ready. He sprinted from behind the pillar, rushing at Gorak with all the speed he could muster. With a quick move, Jackson grabbed a discarded spear lying on the ground, using it as a makeshift weapon. He lunged at Gorak, aiming for the warrior's unprotected side. The spear connected with a loud crack, but Gorak didn't even flinch. Instead, he swung his axe down, knocking Jackson back with a powerful blow. Jackson hit the ground hard, his body aching from the impact. The crowd gasped. It seemed like the fight was over, but Jackson refused to stay down. He had to keep going. He wasn't going to give up. He pushed himself to his feet, his body battered but not broken. His eyes met Zelia's across the arena. She was watching him closely, and he could see the concern in her eyes. She wasn't like the others. She didn't want to see him fall. That thought gave him strength. "Come on, human," Gorak sneered, raising his axe again. "You think you can beat me?" Jackson didn't answer. Instead, he focused on his breathing. He was tired, but he still had one last trick to play. He couldn't defeat Gorak by strength alone, but he didn't have to. Jackson had learned from all his previous trials that victory wasn't always about overpowering your opponent. It was about knowing when to act and how to use your resources. As Gorak lunged forward again, Jackson dodged once more. But this time, he didn't run. He waited. He waited until Gorak's attack left him vulnerable, and then, in a flash, Jackson swept his spear down, aiming directly for the warrior's exposed leg. The strike was quick, precise, and powerful. Gorak howled in pain as he staggered back, dropping his axe in surprise. Blood oozed from the wound, and for the first time, the mighty warrior faltered. The crowd went silent, shocked by what they had just witnessed. Jackson didn't hesitate. He was on his feet again in an instant, moving quickly. He grabbed Gorak's fallen axe and swung it with all his might, using the momentum to strike the warrior down. The blow wasn't as powerful as Gorak's, but it was enough. With one final roar, Gorak fell to the ground, defeated. The arena erupted into cheers as Jackson stood victorious, his chest heaving with exhaustion. He had done it. He had won. The battle was over, and the prize was his. Princess Zelia stood up. From her throne, her eyes wide with disbelief and admiration. She had seen strength before, but what Jackson had shown her was something else entirely. He had fought with heart, with courage, and with a determination that she had never seen in any other suitor. She stepped forward, her voice strong and clear. "Jackson Cole, you have proven yourself. You have shown me that true strength lies not just in power, but in the will to fight for what is right." Jackson looked up at her, a smile on his face. He had done it. He had won. Not just the duel, but her respect. "Princess Zelia," Jackson said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I fight not for glory, but because I believe in something greater. I believe in what we can do together, not just as warriors, but as partners." Zelia looked at him, her heart pounding. For the first time, she wasn't sure what to say. But she knew one thing for certain. Jackson was unlike anyone she had ever known, and maybe, just maybe, he was exactly what she needed. Announcer's voice echoed through the arena. "Jackson Cole is victorious! The trials are complete, and the winner has been chosen!" The arena was alive with energy as the people of Arathar cheered for Jackson. He had done the impossible. Not only had he conquered the strength trial and the diplomacy challenge, but he had also defeated the mighty Gorak in single combat. It was a victory no one had expected, least of all Princess Zelia. Jackson stood in the center of the arena, breathing heavily, his body battered from the duel. His heart raced, but there was a calmness about him that didn't go unnoticed. He had won, But his victory felt different than he had imagined. This was not a victory for personal glory. It was something more important. It was a victory for the values he held dear, values of courage, determination, and respect for those around him. Princess Zelia watched him from her throne, her eyes unwavering. She had always admired strength, but what Jackson had shown her over the course of these trials was more than just strength. He had shown heart, he had shown leadership, wisdom, and the courage to stand up for what was right, even when the odds were against him. Her father, King Arathar, stepped forward. "Jackson Cole," he said, his voice booming across the arena, "you have proven yourself worthy in every way. You have shown strength, courage, intelligence, and the heart of a true leader. You have earned the right to stand by Princess Zelia's side. Will you accept the honor?" The crowd fell silent as all eyes turned to Jackson. He looked up at Zelia, their gazes locking. For a moment, everything else faded away. The cheers, the noise, the pressure, it all disappeared. It was just the two of them in that moment. Jackson took a deep breath. This wasn't just about winning the princess's heart anymore. This was about something bigger. He had never imagined that his journey would bring him to this point. He had never dreamed of winning a princess's heart. But in a way, he had come to understand what it truly meant to be a partner. Not just a leader or a warrior. He stepped forward and bowed slightly to Zelia, a gesture of respect. "I accept, Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I accept not just the honor, but the responsibility. Together, we will build something better, for Arathar, for Earth, and for the entire galaxy." The crowd erupted in applause as Zelia stood up from her throne. There was a faint smile on her lips, something she had never allowed herself to show before. It was a smile of respect, of admiration, and perhaps something more. Princess Zelia stepped down from the throne and walked toward Jackson. The space between them felt charged with anticipation, but there was no tension. There was only understanding. "Jackson," Zelia began, her voice softer than usual, "I've always believed that power and strength were what mattered most. But you've shown me something else. True strength is not in what we can destroy, but in what we can build together. You've taught me that." Jackson smiled, his heart light with relief. "I'm not perfect, Zelia, but together we can learn from each other. We can build something strong, not just for Arathar, but for everyone we care about." Zelia's smile grew as she placed her hand on his shoulder, her eyes shining with newfound warmth. "Then let's build it. Together." The crowd cheered again, but this time the cheers were different. They weren't just for Jackson's victory. They were for the beginning of something new, for a future where strength was not measured in power alone, but in the unity of different worlds and different people working together. As the celebrations continued that evening, Zelia and Jackson stood side by side, watching the stars above. The galaxy stretched out before them, full of possibility. Jackson had come to Arathar as an outsider, a human who had no place in the world of alien politics and traditions. But through his actions, his courage, and his willingness to fight for what was right, he had earned a place by Zelia's side, not as a conqueror, but as a partner. The princess who had once turned away every suitor was now standing beside the one person who had won her respect and maybe even her heart. As the night sky darkened, Zelia looked at Jackson with a sense of wonder. She had spent so long closed off, believing that love and companionship were distractions. But now, with Jackson at her side, she realized how wrong she had been. Strength was important, but love, trust, and partnership were what truly made a leader strong. "We'll face many challenges ahead," Zelia said, her voice filled with resolve. "But together, there is nothing we can't overcome." Jackson nodded, his hand gently brushing against hers. "Together," he repeated. And in that moment, he knew that no matter what the future held, he was ready to face it, because he wasn't alone. He had found a partner in Zelia, and together they would change the course of their worlds. The future of Arathar was no longer uncertain. With the strength of humanity and the wisdom of Arathar united, they would lead the galaxy into a new age of peace, understanding, and cooperation. And as they stood there, side by side, the stars above seemed to shine a little brighter.